Just in everyday living, what do your kids help you with? Well, when your 4-year-old helps you set the table, that's one-to-one correspondence, which is a math skill. When she's working puzzles, that's visual discrimination, which is a pre-reading skill. So there's so many things that your kids do, even if they're just putting their toys away. Classification and organization and sorting are math and language and science skills. So much of what we do is educational for our children. It's building that academic readiness. But we just sometimes second guess ourselves because it's not in a lesson plan, and so we panic.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. This episode of Homeschool Talks features a conversation originally hosted live on our Facebook page. So if you like what you hear, be sure to follow us there for more content like this. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoy the program.
Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to host this live Q&A session all about homeschooling pre-kindergarten to about 5th graders today. I am Vicki Bentley. I am an educational consultant with HSLDA, and I've homeschooled 17 kiddos, and I have 30 years of experience serving homeschool families. And I am thrilled to be joined today by my co-laborer, Krisa Winn. Krisa wears 2 hats in our department. She's one of HSLDA's special needs consultants, and she's also a pre-K to 8th consultant. She has spent many, many years working in early childhood and elementary education and has lots of cool stories to tell, in addition to homeschooling her own 2 children. Thanks for being here, Krisa.
Oh, thank you, Vicki. We both know from experience that homeschooling can be a wonderful experience, so rewarding, and you can create so many memories as a family, but it can also have its challenges too. So we're here to offer some support, answer some questions you might be running into in your homeschool journey, and we're just happy to be able to host this live and help you with some of your questions. So let's get started.
Something somebody had asked in the past that may be helpful for some of our listeners, our viewers. Somebody had asked, how can I know what my kids need to know and by when? And that's a great question. It's one of the first things people usually want to know when they call in is, I don't know what a 2nd grader is supposed to know. I don't know what a 3rd grader is supposed to know. And the fact is, first, you want to check your state law and just find out, is there something in particular, are there particular subjects that your state law requires? Generally, if they're going to require specific subjects, they're going to be pretty basic. It's usually math and language and social studies, science. Sometimes they'll throw in PE and music and those sorts of things, but they don't tell you what to cover within those subjects or in what depth or whatever. So what we usually recommend is for math and language arts, which are skills subjects, that you may want to look at some kind of scope and sequence. We have some listed for you on our website in the What Should I Be Teaching My Child section. Some, for example, are free downloads, such as World Book's Typical Course of Study. Hewitt Homeschooling has learning objectives for K through 8. You can find the core series. The exact name of it's the Core Foundations series, sequence. The series is the curriculum. The sequence is the scope and sequence. But any of those can help you out there. There's a bunch of others, but those are freebies. And those will let you know, in a typical classroom, in the basic subject areas, what would the typical student probably cover in the basic subject areas at each level. Doesn't mean your kids have to do that, but especially in math and language, it can help you see what the continuum is. And you can see if you're leaving any major holes or there are major concepts that your child hasn't grasped yet. Again, hold these lists really, really loosely, but it can give you an idea of what the typical student might cover. Krisa, did you want to add anything to that? I just want to also just throw in there, please remember that the cool thing about homeschooling is you get to decide what your child is ready for, what's important for your family, for your kids to cover, and you get to make those decisions. But it can be helpful to see what milestones the typical student might hit. Krisa?
Yeah, I love that, and we do share that with people a lot. One thing, just practical, a way to use those checklists. I usually, when my girls were younger, I would print something similar to that off, and then every couple of months, I'd get my highlighter in that little check sheet, and I'd go, yes, we are making patterns. Yes, she knows how to do rhyming words. Yes, and I would just kind of highlight those things, and then by the end of the year, there might have been something in science that I didn't cover, and so I just Google that and we'd come up
Right.
with an activity or a lesson. But you're right, you're not bound by those. And would you say you've homeschooled a lot longer than I have, but would you say that most like purchased curriculums from homeschool publishers, you're going to either meet or exceed
That's right.
those
That's right.
standards? And the other thing I think that's often asked that people worry about, especially if they're kind of homeschooling right now, but they have in the back of their mind that they might be putting their child back in public school, is that you don't have to be so meticulous about making sure that everything totally matches up with your state standards, because kids are resilient and children move across state lines all the times, and they'll pick it up. So I say don't worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah. And again, when you're looking at those lists, keep in mind that math and language arts are the skills subjects. Those are the things that are usually covered sequentially that you're going to be probably more concerned with about any major learning gaps in there. But science and social studies, when you look at those lists, I like to think of them as kind of sometime between kindergarten and 8th grade, we need to cover these topics probably. But it doesn't really matter whether you do the solar system this year and weather next year or vice versa. But with the math and the language, it is a little bit more. But again, just looking for what's age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for your kiddos.
Right, exactly.
And those checklists can be helpful if you do things a little less traditionally. Like you said, Krisa, if you're using a packaged curriculum or a published curriculum, then generally speaking, especially in math and language, they're going to be covering pretty much what would be typical for a grade level. But if you're doing things a little less traditionally, then it can be really helpful to have those skills, because knowing what knowing what the skill is that you want to cover, you have a lot of adaptability in how you cover that. For example, one of the skills may be that kids this age level generally start learning division. Well, one family will cover that by using a textbook. Another family may use an online class. Another family may have a co-op class. Another family may give their kid a bag of M&Ms and say, hey, if you guys can divide these up so everybody gets the same amount, you can have them. So as long as you teach the skill, that's what's important.
Oh, here's a good one. I see one from Alyssa, I'm not sure. Best way to homeschool your second grader when you also have a 4-year-old who needs to learn through play, trying to avoid technology.
Go ahead, Chris, I'll let you.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing. This has been my own experience. My children are 3 years apart, so not quite as a span as what you have, but I can remember doing a read aloud, a chapter book with my daughter when she was in 2nd or 3rd grade. And her sister, who's 3 years younger, I'm asking my daughter a question about something that the character did. My little one's in the next room and she's like, it was the mouse. They're really listening.
She's
and
listening.
They're taking things in. But practically speaking, when you have a preschooler, I think the name of the game is to be prepared. And so I used to try to have some little centers set up for my younger child when I was doing more one-on-one work with my older one. A lot of times we would bring Karis in with her older sister, and she picked up on things, even though she was 3 years younger. But I would have a puzzle area. I had a book basket. I had a sand table. She could just step right outside on our deck and be doing that. And I taught her how to do those things too. I would say, when mommy's working with sister, then these are things that you can do. And so I would have those types of things. But I would always bring Karis in when we were doing read alouds, when we were doing science experiments, when we were watching a video about George Washington. We tried to do some things together. So that's just a little tip. Vicki, I'm sure you have a lot of things you could add to that.
Well, I love the way that you combined them sometimes, and then other times there was one-on-one time with Gracie, and Karis had her time as well. I also love that what you've highlighted there is experiential learning for your younger ones. I love to encourage families when you have younger kids. Our goal is really to give them lots of discovery learning, lots of hands-on experiences. lots of what we're doing is we're building hooks on which they can hang their future learning. So we're giving them a context for learning. And it's really easy to think, well, but all she's doing is playing. I need to be doing something preschooly with her. But her play is her work. At that level, even up into early elementary school, their play is their learning. So that's amazing that, you've been doing all of that. Also, anytime people have more than one child, it doesn't even have to be, preschool and second grade, whatever. Anytime you have multiple kiddos, always go back to the math and language or skill subjects. So everybody needs their own math and language approach at their own developmental level. But the other subjects are just content-based. As you discovered when you were reading out loud, if you do a read aloud with Gracie, and then, when they were littler, when you were doing read aloud with Gracie and Karis is listening, she can hear, she can process at a much higher level than she would be able to read. She couldn't read at all. So it's important for us to be able to challenge where our kids are by reading at a level they can understand, but they wouldn't necessarily read. So for example, I would pick for science and history, and for some of your reading projects there, pick what I want my older child to do, and then include my younger one. So instead of having to have, second grade history and second grade science and preschool history and preschool science, I'm just going to pick what I want my older kiddo to do, and I'm going to include my younger one, adapt as I need to, do those read alouds. But I'm going to teach to the older one and let the younger one ride the mental bus to her own mental bus stop. And then she's going to hop off the bus. And, we're going to know they've hopped off the bus at that point. They're going to let you know. But like you said, they're going to pick up things you would never have thought they would have picked up. A friend of mine, she had 5 daughters, and they were working on the Renaissance. And so she took her 4-year-old with her to the poster store or something to pick up an art poster from Renaissance art. And, she hadn't really been doing anything special with the 4-year-old, but she'd been listening, like you said, with Karis. And so when they walked in the store and the lady said, "Can I help you?" The little girl said, "I'd like a Renoir." And they thought that was so cute because she knew. And she said, "I would like the girl with the watering can." I mean, she was really paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, awesome. Just be a family. You're a family first. And so when you pull those things together, then anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. And I try to preach this message quite often that, like you said, there's so much children do learn through their play. That play is their work. So even if they're playing dolls in a kitchen area or they're playing with their cars somewhere, there's vocabulary development, there's turn taking, there's learning about different roles in the family. And I always tried to throw in a little bit of print as well. So I would put cookbooks with my children's little kitchen area so that they could see that print awareness too. Even being outside, they're getting gross motor development, sometimes fine motor development. They're learning about plants, they're learning about animals. Just so much is happening in ways that we don't even imagine when you just sit back and think, what do children learn through these experiences? And it doesn't have to be that intentional. It often just happens.
Yeah, those are some great examples. I was just reminded of the things that we do in everyday living. Just in everyday living. What do your kids help you with? Well, when your 4-year-old helps you set the table, that's one-to-one correspondence, which is a math skill. When she's working puzzles, that's visual discrimination, which is a pre-reading skill. So there's so many things that your kids do, even if they're just putting their toys away. Classification and organization and sorting are math and language and science skills. So much of what we do is educational for our children. It's building that academic readiness. But we just sometimes second guess ourselves because it's not in a lesson plan. And so we panic. I see we've got a teacher who's trying to homeschool her 11-year-old and still earn some kind of income. So you mentioned that you're currently a public school teacher. So I don't know what your hours are, if you're flexible, if you're working from home with Zoom classes still, or if you're in the classroom setting. But if you're wanting to stay in the classroom setting and you're just looking for a way to homeschool them afterwards, one of the great things about homeschooling is the flexibility. We do have families who homeschool and work. I have a girlfriend who actually she was a single mom, worked 3 jobs while she homeschooled her kids. And so she just flexed out a lot. She relied on some friends to help out when she could. She could do a lot of her primary teaching in the hours she was home with her children, if she didn't have flexibility in her hours, she would just rearrange her schedule. Nothing says that your homeschooling has to, in most cases, I can't think of a state that tells you the hours, but in most states that I can think of, it doesn't matter what time of day you're homeschooling. It's the key is that you work when is convenient for you. I mean, some families are done by 7:30 in the morning. We didn't even start till 8:45. Some people were done by the time we had started. So really up to you. There are also different ways to homeschool. There's different materials that are available. I'm a big fan of materials that are designed to be learned, not to be taught. And that distinction is going to be for your 11-year-old. I'm assuming he's probably reading pretty well on his own. We want to give him as much material that's self-guided as possible to help you in those hours so that he can be doing a lot of his work on his own. You're there more as his coach, making sure that he stays on track, answering any questions for him. But we're trying to get you away from having to sit next to him for several hours a day and do the teaching. And that may help you out there with your hours. So, Krisa, do you have any other suggestions? I know you've been in that position of working and homeschooling.
Well, it's just, it does take some creativity, some thinking outside the box. And like you said, there are a lot of resources that can lift some of the actual involvement of the parent. I mean, although I think parent involvement in homeschooling is ideal, sure, and to be accessible is ideal, but there are a lot of great resources. There's video-based instruction too, so that can free you up some so that, again, you can have more of that coach role, and that's less time consuming. So there's that. I see another question about how do you prove the play learning on hours. So there are some states where you're not dictated what hours you have to homeschool, but that you are told you have to have so many hours in. And so I would just document that. I would just write, learning stations or independent play. And then, if you wanted to really be formal about it, you could write underneath there language development, turn taking, social emotional development. I mean, you don't have to do that, but if that would make you feel better, that's one way to do it. I know when I was a teacher in the public school for several years, I worked for a Title I school, which meant that we received money to educate preschoolers. And I read a lot of research during that time that actually play, you needed at least 60 minutes of uninterrupted playtime for it to really get the benefit of it. So like an hour of just letting kids play, that's like school, I mean, it was preschool, but anyway, don't tell anybody at HSLDA that I worked at a Title I preschool. Long time ago.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind is that most states that are requiring you to keep that kind of hours, there's just a couple of them that require you to document hours like that. You're often not under compulsory attendance until the child is at least 5 or 6 years old. So when we're talking about our younger kiddos, you're generally not looking at a child who's needing to report anything anyway. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, those learning blocks are great. So let's see. Somebody says, how do you juggle individualizing their education when you have, I think she has triplets? Just like any other multi-level family, I think, just looking at how your kids learn best, where they are. I think the hardest part about individualizing their education, most likely, is not what to do with the curriculum, but from an emotional standpoint for them. So when I've had families who have, say, twins, for example, who may be working at different levels, sometimes it can be helpful even to use a different curriculum publisher for them. So they're not comparing themselves to each other because they're not in the same book. Now, that may be more than you want to do. And you know your kids. You know how competitive they're going to be. You know if this is going to be, somebody's going to get their feelings hurt. And sometimes it's just stressing to our kids that everybody learns a little differently, and you're good at this, and he's good at this, and we're all working on this. And Krisa, do you have any other suggestions?
Well, I think that's good. And I think, again, and I always share this with people, that you kind of set the tone for your home and for obviously then your homeschool. And so I think always having that pouring into your children the uniqueness of how
Yes.
they're created, that's so important. And sometimes you just have to have a heart-to-heart, especially if you have a child that really is struggling. Or I know I ran into this a lot as a classroom teacher. Sometimes I would have a child in my class that just came from very hard places. And so when he was not in the class or she was not in the class, I had my little discipline system, and it didn't work for that child at all. And so I had, and at the time I can remember I was teaching kindergartners, and they have a great sense of justice. They did not understand why the plan that I had in place, why I wasn't using it for that child. So sometimes you have to have a heart-to-heart. It's when that child isn't around, and you just say, listen, this child has some needs that are different from your needs, and what I do for you isn't going to work for them. And usually kids get that, and they understand it. So it's not really an easy thing to deal with, but certainly homeschooling helps you to have a little bit more ability to identify your child's needs and to then attempt to meet them, as opposed to the ratios that you have in a typical classroom, for sure.
Yeah, gives you a little bit more wiggle room. And another great resource, Dr. Kathy Cook at Celebrate Kids has a lot of great information for you on the different kinds of SMART. So it's really important for kids to realize that we're all smart in different ways. And the conventional school setting tends to glorify intellectual smarts, but there's a lot of other kinds of intelligences. So being able to find things that your child, if there's a child who's not maybe at the same level as another, finding things for him to excel in that are in his area of gifting can help. So, all right, let's see.
I see one. It goes back to our play question.
Yes.
She says, with the importance of that, do you recommend having a curriculum in kindergarten? We'll start kinder in the fall, and I'm not planning on doing much sit-down learning. Is that advised? Actually, that's awesome. I mean, again, if you go back to really what research shows, it's developmentally, children don't need really what we call explicit instruction and until they're a little bit older, past kindergarten. But in our society, that explicit instruction keeps getting pushed down, so that you've got, reading instruction taking place in kindergarten. So yes, you can do kindergarten in what I would call a developmentally appropriate way. When it comes to choosing a curriculum, there are a lot of things that come into play with curriculum. Do you need a curriculum in kindergarten? No. But some people, because of maybe their work, maybe they're working, maybe they've got a lot on their plate, it might be nice to have something that's kind of laid out for you, just because it's a time saver, and it can you don't have to do everything that's written in it, but it can give you some tracks, I guess, to roll on, and can save you some time. Vicki, what do you think?
Well, I'd also like to remind our viewers here that you've been homeschooling. If you've got younger kids, you've been homeschooling. You've homeschooled from birth.
I love that.
But it seems like when our kids turn about 5 years old, we panic, and it feels like life has to turn upside down. Well, they have to go to school now. We have to sit down. We have to do this. And so I like to ask parents, if nobody told you when your child turned 5 that he had to go to school, what would you be doing with him? What have you been doing with him? What is your family dynamic? What is your family personality? Some families are very nature minded. They do a lot of nature walks, and they go to the park, and they do a lot of exploring. Others are more artistic. Some are more language based, and they do a lot of reading together. They do cooking, whatever it is. So take whatever you've been doing with them, and now be a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more intentional. You don't have to do everything all at once. So for example, if you're a family that loves to go to the library and get library books, you might look at something, if you want something a little bit more purposeful and slightly structured for you, if you feel more comfortable, you might look at something like 5 in a Row, where it's a unit study approach for you based on classic kids books that you're already reading to your kids. And it just gives you a couple of activities each week that you can pick from to do based on the book. So now you're taking what you're already doing, and you're just stepping up the game a little bit. So that's just important to me, that we're just intentional about life, and then you don't have to panic about that. Yes, as your kids get more mature, obviously you're going to integrate a little bit more of maybe something a little bit more purposeful from an academic perspective. But there's a lot of research out there to show that kids, until they're at least 7 or 8, basically do best with just the life learning. They are still going to be learning. It's not as if you don't sit down with a math book, your child isn't going to learn to count or isn't going to integrate, counting money or adding. They're still using those and they're learning them, but it's in the context of their everyday living. So they're building a scaffolding that they can build the rest of their learning on. So John Taylor Gatto, the author of The Underground History of American Education, he was the New York State History Teacher of the Year. And he once said that it's not a verbatim quote here, but that pretty much all of your basic math and language skills could be learned in under 100 hours of purposeful intention when the child is mature and ready for that. So put that in perspective with our panicked school years, and maybe it'll give you a little bit more breathing space.
It also is, I think, true that motivation can get higher as children get older. Yep. I can teach about identification of coins and dollars and money, but until a child wants to purchase something and go to a store, right. It really is it's an abstract concept to them. Yeah. And so as children mature, those things that we're teaching on paper and with paper and pencil are more abstract, and there's nothing wrong with laying a foundation, but right. that motivation can really help things kick in. You get it done a lot faster.
That's right.
You're motivated to learn.
Once it's relevant to them. That's a great example. A friend of mine was in the lesson plan book. It said she was supposed to be teaching him alphabetical order, and he was struggling, and he was sliding under the table crying, and she wanted to slide under the table crying. And then it hit her, hey, he has a baseball card collection. So she said, what if I could show you a way that when you all are doing your baseball card trades, you could find your cards faster so you could make the good trades faster. He thought that was really cool. So she said, she didn't say, go get your collection. She said, go get me 5 baseball cards. And he brought down 5 cards, and she showed him how to put them in alphabetical order. But now, because it was relevant to him, it stuck. And it was helpful for him. So then she said, go get 5 more. And he kept getting a couple more and a couple more, integrating them in. They went into the second letter and all that good stuff. And by the end of the afternoon, he'd alphabetized his whole baseball card collection and taught his little brother alphabetical order. So she said, this would have taken me weeks and weeks if I were doing this by this textbook.
And tears, so, yeah. That's awesome. I love that story.
It was relevant.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Okay. So what other questions? Best resources in Montana, I think. What are the resources I need to have to make my child successful in each of the different materials for each grade? We talked a little bit about that at the beginning, I think, as far as resources to make your child successful in different grade levels. There are some scope and sequence guidelines that can give you an idea of what the typical student might cover in each of those levels. I'm not looking at the Montana law right off the bat. Chris and I don't work in the legal department, but when we're talking with families who call in, we can refer back to the legal information that you can find on our website at hslda.org/legal. And you can see if there are any specific subject requirements for your state. But generally speaking, we just know you're great parents and you want to provide a well-rounded education for your kids. So generally that's going to be math and language, probably some science and history to let them learn about the world around them. Usually going to be some PE, probably everything you do has got some kind of art aspect to it. So there's usually these things are built in. Math and language, as we said before, are your skills subjects. So those are the things that we probably want to be kind of purposeful about covering in a sequence. Your kids aren't going to be really successful at multiplication if they haven't learned to add. So there's things that you want to do kind of in a sequence. Your other subject areas, science and history, You may just want to pick something that's relevant to your family right now. Maybe you just, like Krisa, maybe you just got a dog not long ago. And so now you're studying dog breeds, or you're studying care of dogs. You're studying dog health. Maybe you have ants in the kitchen. And so, it's that season where the ants are coming in the spring. And so you study the different kinds of ants. And I wonder why these ants are coming in here. There's nothing on the floor, and, discover what they're looking for. So you can make your life the springboard for whatever you're going to study. Or, like I said, you can look at that scope and sequence, and you can say, you know what? Normally, most kids at this level cover XYZ subject. Let's go to the library and get a few things on that. Or let's look online at some catalogs and see what materials might be fun.
Well, Nisser wanted us to talk about what a day looks like. Like, practically speaking, what might the day look like when you have multiple children, multiple ages? And I'm going to let you talk to that really quickly, Vicki. Sorry. I know you just took a drink.
That's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of different ways to do that. It really depends partly on your curriculum approach. In our household, because we had 8 kids. And so in our household, I would start off with everybody in the living room together. In our family, it was a devotional time. It could be anything you want to do that brings the kids together for 10 or 15 minutes, in our case, to get a focused, prayerful start to our day. Didn't mean we didn't crash and burn 20 minutes later, but at least we started off right. So we got together, so we were all on the same page to begin with. And then I would get started in the focus subjects. For us, it was going to be math and language arts. And so while I was fairly fresh and they were fairly fresh, we chose to concentrate on those subjects. And then I would just get one kiddo started, and then it's kind of a round robin approach, and then go on around to different kids. You just kind of cycle around. If you're using an online material, it may be that you're just getting your kids set up for something. If you're doing something together, it may be that they're all in one room together. So it's really going to depend on your material. I have an article for you called A Day in Our Homeschool, where we've actually outlined what our day looked like at different stages of my kids' development. And at the bottom, I have links to other family stories. One of the most freeing things for me when I started homeschooling back in the 80s, I didn't, you didn't have all of your friends who homeschooled. Everybody was hiding if they were homeschooling. And I read a book called The Survivor's Guide to Homeschooling by Shackelford and White. And the most freeing thing for me in that whole book was a couple of examples of different families' daily routines. And it was so liberating to discover there wasn't any one right way to do this, that everybody could decide what worked best for their family. Like I said, some of my friends, I lived in a farming community. Some of them were up at the crack of dawn. Their kids were done homeschooling by the time we even got up. Some of our families, like our working moms that have written in, they may be doing their homeschooling at 3:30 in the afternoon or in the early evening, and they may have daycare in the early time of the day. So just so many variables there. And one of the things Krisa and I love to do is talk with our member families about their specifics. So if you have specific questions and you're a member, we love to help you troubleshoot a little bit and give you some ideas of things. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes or ears can help you find different ways to tweak your routine.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I just talked to a mom a few days ago, and she was just putting so much pressure on herself because she said, I don't think that the way I'm homeschooling is the way everybody else is supposed to, is homeschooling. And so I'm just going to say to you that are out there right now listening, give yourself grace and know that your family is unique. Your circumstances are unique. You can read through these comments and see that everybody's family is a little bit different. And so, there are things that we can share that might make things run more smoothly, but you don't have to homeschool like your buddy does or a friend does or your sister-in-law does. And so you have that freedom. So that's good stuff, Vicki.
That's good. And speaking of doing things like everybody else does, somebody asked about, I see a lot of families have a tutor for their kids for 1 or 2 subjects. Is that recommended? It's totally up to you. It would never have been in my budget to have hired a tutor. So I had to find ways to work in areas maybe that weren't my strong suit. This is where trading with friends, if you're part of a support group, it's a great network for you. It was really easy for me to get on to my support support group network and say, hey, I have a question about this particular concept. Who can help me with this? And we would just help each other out. Some families find it helpful to have a tutor on hand, maybe not for everyday teaching, but maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks to have somebody for an hour come in and say, let's go over any, say, math concepts that you didn't understand this week. So again, going to be totally up to you. Another area that I often see parents struggle is, all of my friends have their kids in learning co-ops. Do I need to do that? You are certainly welcome to do that. There are some great co-ops. There's some wonderful benefits. My kids participated in an enrichment co-op for a lot of their years. But it is totally possible to homeschool totally on your own at home if that works for your family. So there's not a right way and a wrong way to do this. I want you to have liberty to do what fits into your family's budget. Some people say, I can't afford to homeschool because, my friend spent $1,500 a child and we just don't have that kind of money. We homeschooled for less than $600 a year with 8 kids. You could technically homeschool with just a library card, but most people are going to want to at least have a math and language program. But, you can do that for less than $100 if you need to. And then you can use the library for your other subjects. So, whether you bring in a tutor, whether you work with a co-op, it's totally up to you, the material that you're using, the needs that you have, and your level of comfort with what you're working with your kids.
Love that. We're kind of running out of time here, Vicki, but I see another question from Texas. They're getting ready to homeschool in the fall, but they're a little nervous and excited. She said, my kids are a little hesitant because they have their friends at school, and my oldest one really excels in school and does well. Any tips for taking them out when they're a little older and hesitant? And, I think I would just encourage them that in homeschooling, like Vicki said, it's not like they don't have to be alone in their different circumstances, but
Right.
A lot of communities do have co-ops, and if there's not a co-op that kind of fits your budget or your family, start your own. I've done that. I've done that before, and it was pretty cool how that all came together. It just started small, but then you kind of like, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. So if you're looking for a niche kind of group, chances are somebody else is as well. But it's also an opportunity for them to really nurture their strengths. So, more time for ballet maybe, or art classes, and those are all opportunities to continue to interact socially with friends. So those are kind of things. Of course, there's always, you can lure them that, pajama day can happen more often, different things like that. Schedule's going to be a little more relaxed in most cases. And so lots of perks for kids when it comes to homeschooling.
Yeah. And I want to go back to when I mentioned you can homeschool without all the co-ops and things like that. That doesn't mean there's not a place for even support group activities and things like that. You may not use a co-op, but that doesn't mean you can't connect with other families. I encourage you to, if nothing else for your own sanity, to connect with a local support group. So you've got other parents to talk to when you have those days and you think, why am I doing this? You have a reminder of why you're doing what you're doing, but you also have those connections. And my kids, growing up, they had skating and bowling and clubs. They were in sports. They were on yearbook staff. We had all of those things. We had cotillion. They had a lot of different activities that they were involved in, but we got to pick them, and we could pick, we could do them for a season if we needed to. So just because your kids are homeschooled doesn't mean they don't have social opportunities. So there's a lot of those available. I also have an article called Creating Your Own Opportunities. As Krisa mentioned, sometimes you just don't find what you're looking for. Maybe you're in a rural area or your kids have a very unique interest. And it doesn't mean you have to set up something that's, oh my goodness, is this long-term class. I don't think I have the energy to do something every week for 30 weeks. That's okay. Do a one-off. Just say, hey, we're going to get together and do a handful of experiments that we've been wanting to do. Who wants to come on over? Or my family's taking a field trip to XYZ place. We'd love for somebody else to join. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be some mega 500 kid thing. It could just be we invite another family. So we pulled my daughter out of school when she was in 5th grade. And it was a little bit of a struggle. She was a social butterfly, but she'll tell you now that she's an adult and homeschooling her own kids, she'll tell you that her family didn't have her heart. The kids at school had her heart. And so she looked at her siblings as kind of a bother and an interruption to her. But she said the time that she spent with her family at home then that all changed. And now she's very close to her sisters, and she has a lot of great other relationships outside the home as well. But I encourage you to connect with your local support group. Your kids are going to build relationships there. When one of my girls turned 16, she had a sleepover, and we told her she could have 16 girlfriends over. We were brave. So, 16 girlfriends over, and 15 of them were her homeschool girlfriends.
Oh, wow.
And one was a little gal from her Sunday school class. So just goes to show you, just because your kids are homeschooled doesn't mean they aren't going to have any friends. It will be a little bit of an adjustment. And nothing says that their friends from school can't still come over and visit from time to time, depending upon your circumstances. So,
yeah. Well, I'm looking, let's see, maybe we can do one more question, Vicki, you think?
Okay, sure. Let's see. Any tips on preparing for the transition from elementary to middle school? And it jumped, so I'm not sure where the rest of the question was. Any tips on preparing for the transition from elementary to middle school work? Well, your curriculum is going to be a guide for you if you're using something fairly structured. Generally speaking, now, Krisa, you've worked in the classroom setting, so you may have a little bit more guidance in this on what you were doing with your kiddos as they were moving up into upper level. But a lot of times your material is going to be guiding you in that. You're going to be doing a little bit more research and reporting in your language arts program. You may have a little bit more involved reading going on. You're moving from that early stage of memorizing things and just reading things to more of the reporting on things and doing your own research. So you're moving from that early stage of just, like I said, the memorizing stage up into more of the logic stage, the sorting things out, the understanding why what you memorized when you were a kid matters, how you're going to utilize that. But your material is generally going to guide you in that. Mm-hmm. Krisa, do you have any other suggestions?
I agree with that. I think, too, of course, the middle school years, I suddenly, when my daughter turned 11 and 12, I'm like, who are you? Like, I mean, she changed so much. So I think there's the social emotional preparation too, and just being aware and understand. I had a sweet friend when my daughter was going from about 5th grade to 6th grade. She gave all the girls in her Sunday school class a little bottle a little jar that had glitter in it. And she said, girls, I want you to shake that up. And you see how crazy and mixed up it all looks. There are going to be times in the next few years where life is going to look kind of crazy and mixed up, and what you thought it wasn't always, it doesn't seem like it's going to work anymore, or you're mad, or you got a lot of emotions going on. And just know that just like this glitter is going to settle, you're going to settle too, and that your mom, your dad are going to be there for you. And so I think those are like some conversations to have, and just kind of preparing them too. I mean, all along, I'm sure that you're building responsibility and giving kids responsibilities, but of course, as they get into those middle school, high school years, that's going to increase, and you're going to start letting go and saying, okay, how about instead of me organizing your notebook or where your materials are, let's figure out what works for you, and giving them more of those controls too, I think are helpful. They long for that and want that.
That's perfect. Turning over a lot of that ownership. By the time my kids can read really well on their own, I'm giving them the lesson plan book. I'm writing it out for them, but I want them to see that. What I discovered with my middle school kids was, a lot of times if I got any balking from them, it was because it felt like all they did all day was school. And so I knew what the end of the day looked like. I knew what our plan was. And so I knew if once we do this, this, and this, and this, we're done. But in their mind, all they saw was every time I finish something, she gives me something else to do. So if they had their lesson plan for the day and they could see what the expectations were, they knew when I get this done, I'm finished. And so that gave them some ownership. And like you said, sometimes asking them, do you want to change your routine around a little bit? We still have to get these things accomplished, but maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe they're wanting to, sometimes they're getting to that age where they're needing a little bit more sleep. So maybe they want to start a little later in the day. If they can show you, they can finish. So we have an article for you called Making the Most of the Middle School Years that may be helpful, again, from that emotional standpoint, that transition that they're making emotionally as well as socially, that can be helpful. But again, they're wanting to stretch their wings a little bit. So like you said, giving them some ownership can be really helpful. Please know we have a lot of resources for you on our website at hslda.org. We also have a lot of webinars on a lot of topics. Go to that community tab. You can find our webinars. You can see all the ones we've done in the past that will answer a lot of the questions that you've got here. We've got some other webinars that weren't necessarily Q&A. They were panel discussions. We'll answer a lot of those things for you. And you can see a link to those in the comments, I believe. But besides those resources on our web, just a reminder that HSLDA members do have access to our team of educational consultants, and we're there to help you with all of your questions about teaching your kids. We have consultants who specialize in helping parents with questions from everything from preschool through high school, special needs, struggling learners, whether it's finding a math curriculum or coming up with your 4-year plan for high school, your transcripts, whatever it might be, we're here to help you.
We just want to thank you again. I saw people from Mexico, Puerto Rico, all over the country that joined us today. We hope that you have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's team of educational consultants. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the number of curriculum options to choose from? Or maybe you're frustrated because your child is struggling and you're not sure what to do next? Our educational consultants can help. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized, practical guidance on everything from lesson planning and record keeping to helping a child with learning difficulties. If you want to experience less frustration and more progress in your homeschool, get support from our educational consultants by becoming a member of HSLDA. Learn more at hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a review to let us know what you think. To hear more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to this podcast or head on over to hslda.org/podcast for more inspiring stories and awesome ideas about homeschooling. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll see you next time.